Today we'll be upgrading one of our weather cams by replacing a 720p Sony with a Hikvision 4K bullet camera. So let's grab the camera and get started. The camera we will be replacing is a Sony CH110 IP camera that has a resolution of 720p. Now this is an indoor camera that I placed in an outdoor camera housing. And it's turned out to be a pretty good setup because it's been running for several years and I've not had any issues with it. The only reason I'm replacing it is because the image quality is very poor compared to other cameras that you'll get today. The requirements that I have for a camera for use in my application as a weather cam will differ only slightly from those that you may have if, for example, you're trying to configure the camera for use with an NVR. Now, I need a camera that has a high quality image, and today that means at least a 4K resolution. With the price of cameras the way they are, there's really no reason to use anything that has less than a 4K resolution. Next, I need a camera that can FTP images at a specified interval. Now, this means for me every minute, maybe every 2 minutes. Next, if the camera stamps information on the image like the ID or date and time information, I need to be able to turn that off. I already have an application that stamps weather specific information on the image and I don't want anything else on there. First thing we need to do is actually cut the network cable that's feeding this camera. Now this is a PoE camera, so I went ahead and disconnected the power and the network cable because I don't want to risk cutting the cable and shorting anything out. So we will clip this and get it out of the way. First things first, let's get our camera ready to install. We'll do so by putting in the micro SD card into the bottom of our camera. So I picked this up at Best Buy, 64 gig, ran about $17. These screws are really small and would be extremely easy to lose out here, so I'm trying to be careful when I take these off. Make sure I got a hold of them and set them on a place where they're not going to roll off. And with that cover off, you can see where the SD card will go into. That being said, we'll put our cover back on. With the old camera down and our clipped network cable, we need to prepare the cable for our new connection. So with the new camera, we do have a watertight connection here, so we'll put the nut on first and a little washer gasket piece, then the watertight connector, I'm just going to start that. We're not going to tighten that down until we get everything ready to go here. Now with the end on the cable, we will just crimp him down. And there we go. Now, let's plug this into our camera. So we will plug him in. Slide our connector, slide our waterproof cover over top. Slide it till it's snug, and then we will tighten this nut down on top, and that just compresses the gasket up against the wire, keeps water from getting in. But I'm going to loosen these set screws up, which will let all of these joints turn freely. That should let us mount our camera just a little bit easier. And now we're to the point where we can begin configuring our camera. But before we do so, I want to make a point. If you think you're going to fire up your favorite browser, whether it be Firefox or Chrome, and start configuring the camera, well, get used to disappointment. There are some things in the Hikvision interface that just do not work outside of Internet Explorer. For example, anytime you go to display a preview image within the browser, it's going to require that you have a plugin installed. Well, that plugin only works in Internet Explorer. And there's a couple other minor things I found, mostly involving file operations. For example, if you're trying to import or export the config file, you're going to have issues if you're using anything other than Internet Explorer. So, hope you got a Windows box laying around because you're going to need it. Speaking of needing a Windows box, you're going to need one to initially activate your camera. If you bought your camera new, it came with a mini CD that has this SADP application on it. Now, if you didn't buy your camera new, don't worry, you can still download this application from the Hikvision website. To activate your camera, select the camera in the grid and check the box on the left-hand side. Over on the right, you'll notice that it's asking you to set a password. Now, you're going to be setting the password for the admin account. Now, this brings up my first security complaint. Passwords for the admin user, as with any user on the camera, can only be 16 characters long. So take that into consideration. Make sure that you select a secure password. I also do not enable the Hik Connect. Once you set your password, go ahead and click Activate. Now that the camera is activated, let's modify the network parameters so that we can access the web admin portal. The easiest thing to do is just select the Enable DHCP, and if you have a DHCP server on your network, this will pull in all of the IP settings and let you avoid setting everything manually. However, this isn't my recommended way to do this, so this actually segues nicely into our next security point. My recommendation would be that if you have a managed switch on your network, to configure a VLAN on the network, to throw this camera in that VLAN and apply ACLs to it. And that way, the camera can only communicate with the devices on your network that you want it to. Finally, to save our changes, enter in the admin password and select the Modify button. Now we're ready to log into our camera for the first time. For username, enter admin, and for the password, you'll want to enter the password that you created in the previous step. Once that's done, select Login. Now that we're logged into the camera, we're looking at the live view. And if this is the first time you've logged into the camera, you're going to be looking at a blank page just like this. What we need to do is to install the Web Components plugin. So in the lower left-hand corner, select the third icon from the right and select the one that looks like a camera lens. Now, That'll provide us a link that we can install the Web Components plugin. Now make sure that you're doing this in Internet Explorer because, like we mentioned earlier, it only works in that browser. Once the plugin's installed, now your screen should look like this. Now we're going to step through the configuration options that are necessary to configure this camera for use as a weather cam. We're going to start off under System, System Settings, and the Basic Information tab. If you have a device name and a device number that you would like to put in, go ahead and do that now. Even though it's not 100% necessary, it is a good housekeeping task. Now, select Time Settings. We need to ensure that the time zone and time on the camera are set correctly. Starting with the time zone, select the one that's appropriate for your area. Next, when setting time, we have two options. We can either tell the camera to sync with an NTP server, or we can manually set the time. You can see in this example that I've went with the manual option. If you want to go this route, simply select the manual time sync radio button and select the checkbox there for sync with computer time. This will actually set the camera in sync with your computer. Once you've done so, hit save. Now we need to configure the camera to work with daylight savings time. This can be done by selecting the DST tab and checking the box for Enable DST. You'll see we have three options here. We have Start Time, End Time, and DST Bias. Let's begin by looking at the start time. Daylight savings will actually start in November on the first Sunday at 2 in the morning, which is the 02. The end time for daylight savings is October, the second Sunday, and also at 2 in the morning. Now, the DST bias can just be left alone to its default setting of 30 minutes. Once you've made these settings, go ahead and select Save. Now let's talk about user management. Selecting user management from the menu displays the list of users that have been set up on the device. Every camera will have an admin account. In my opinion, this is a shortcoming with the security of the device. First, the admin account cannot be renamed. This means that anyone attempting to log into the device knows at least one valid username in which to attack. Second, you are limited in how strong you can make the password. This device only supports up to a 16-character password. Now, I'll go ahead and create another user account that I'll use to manage this device, again, making the password as secure as possible. I will make this an account and operator and give it only the permissions that are necessary for managing the device. Now let's take a look at the network settings. If you wish to change any of your camera's IP settings, this can be done by selecting Basic Settings underneath the Network menu. Next, since I require the camera to FTP images, I need to configure the FTP settings. This can be done by selecting Advanced Settings under the Network menu. Here you will enter the server-specific information and select Save when you are finished. If you also wanted your camera to email images to you, this can be configured from the Email tab. I have this configured on a couple of cameras around my house that I'm using for security monitoring. For this application, it is unnecessary and I'll leave it blank. It's also worth noting that I don't allow my cameras to connect openly to the internet. Enabling such features such as hik-connect is unnecessary and I want to make sure that I have that turned off. Looking at the Video Audio tab, there are only a couple of settings here that I change. First, I change the resolution to 3480 by 2160. Next, I verify that the video quality setting is configured for highest. Now let's look at the image settings. You are looking at this menu as it appears on Firefox. If we were using Internet Explorer, we would see a preview of the camera image. The only item that I need to change on this screen is turning off the IR light. I do this to avoid reflections in the camera image at night. Now this is located under the backlight settings. Most importantly for my application is turning off anything that the camera would be stamping on the image. This can be done from the OSD settings tab. Make sure that everything on this page is unchecked and click Save when you have finished. The most crucial part of this configuration for me is configuring the camera to take snapshots. This is done from the Schedule Settings menu. First, we need to configure the schedule so that it will be performing captures 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, I don't have screenshots of this, but here are the steps. Start by clicking on the bar for Monday. Make sure that the drop-down has continuous selected and that the time is from 00:00 to 24:00. Then click Save. Next, if you mouse over the end of the bar, a button that looks like 2 pages will appear. Go ahead and click that button. This allows us to copy the schedule that you just created to the other days of the week. Check the box for Select All, then OK. Your schedule should now look like this. As always, select Save when you're finished. Next, click on the Capture Parameters tab. Here is where we'll actually configure the snapshots to occur. Start by selecting Enable Timing Snapshot. Now you'll want JPEG for the format, then you'll want to choose the resolution that you want. For me, this is 3480 by 2160. Naturally, I want the highest quality image possible, so I select High for quality. Now the interval here is displayed in milliseconds, but you can configure this in the unit that you want by changing the drop-down. Now I will say I've noticed that when you go away from this page and come back, no matter what you've configured it in, it'll always be displayed in milliseconds. But you can see here I've got my capture set up for every 60 seconds. Next, I want to discuss video recordings. Now I've said from the start of the video that I was mostly concerned with image capture. Well, it's mostly accurate. If you go back to the section where we were preparing the new camera, I installed a 64 gig micro SD card. Now this is for local recording storage. Under storage, if you select storage management, you'll see the card that we installed. As you can see, our card reads as uninitialized. Now the card must be formatted in order for us to use it. To do this, select the card and then click the Format button. You'll see a pop-up for confirmation and just hit OK on that. Once it's done, our card will read as normal and we're ready to record. To set the record schedule, the process is identical to that of setting the capture schedule, except this time, under Schedule Settings, select Record Schedule instead of Capture. I set it for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just like we did for capture. I do this on all my cameras to ensure that I can retrieve recordings regardless of what happens. I do this on my Weathercam so that in case they record something interesting, I can pull the full recording off so I can view it elsewhere. Finally, it's important to back up our configuration. Now I do this on the off chance that I have to reset the camera. If I have a backup of the config, I can easily re-import it and save myself 5 or 10 minutes. To export the config, this is under the Maintenance section. Simply click the Device Parameters button under Export. Give the file a name, and then tell it where to save. Importing a config is just as simple. Under Import, select the Browse button, then select the config file, then click Import. This is a feature that only works with Internet Explorer, so keep that in mind. Well, now that the camera is installed and working, I wanted to take time to show you a comparison between a Sony IP camera that we have in production still on our tower and this new Hikvision camera. These images are taken at nearly the same time, and the difference is just amazing. I'm planning a few more Hikvision videos here in 2020 that'll cover everything from new camera installation to some troubleshooting that I've done recently. But if you've liked this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you have any comments, make sure you leave them below. But for now, I'm Mike, KD9BLW 73.